All right, picture this for me. New York City, 1974.
Okay.
The World Trade Center.
Yeah.
Those, twin towers piercing in the sky.
Hmm?
They had just been completed.
Yeah.
And on a foggy August morning,
Uh-huh.
a young Frenchman named Philippe Petit
Okay.
stepped out onto a wire
Wow.
strung between those towers,
Mm.
a quarter of a mile above the bustling streets.
Yeah?
This wasn't just a daredevil stunt.
It's incredible to think of.
This was art,
Ah.
a performance that would capture the world's imagination.
Right.
So
Hmm.
today we're going to take a deep dive into the story of Philippe Petit,
Okay.
the man who dared to walk between the clouds. And if you enjoy these explorations of extraordinary individuals
Yeah.
and fascinating stories,
Mm-hmm.
make sure you subscribe to the deep dive for more.
It's interesting that you frame it as art because that's precisely how Petit saw himself
Right.
as a performance artist, not a stuntman.
Yeah.
To understand his audacious act,
Yeah.
we need to go back to his beginnings,
Okay.
exploring what ignited this passion for high wire walking
Mm-hmm.
and how it evolved into something so much grander.
You're right. It wasn't a sudden impulse.
No.
So tell me, where did it all begin for Philippe Petit? What sparked this fascination with the high wire?
Well, Petit's love for the high wire began in his childhood.
Hmm.
He was drawn to it from a young age,
Okay.
mastering all sorts of tricks, juggling, acrobatics,
Well,
even unicycling on the wire.
really?
It's as if he was building a repertoire,
Yeah.
always pushing the boundaries of what was possible.
So it was more than just the thrill of danger.
Right.
There was a clear artistic element to it
Absolutely.
from the very start.
And this is where the concept of performance art comes in.
Okay.
Petit wasn't just interested in the technical skill of walking on a wire.
Right.
He wanted to create an experience,
Yeah.
a spectacle that would challenge perceptions and evoke emotions.
So how did he go from performing on a wire in his backyard to setting his sights on the World Trade Center?
Yeah.
That seems like a pretty big leap.
It was a series of steps,
Yeah.
each one bolder than the last.
Okay.
But the catalyst for his Twin Towers obsession was a seemingly mundane event, a visit to the dentist.
Okay, now I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
What does a dentist's office have to do with tightrope walking between skyscrapers?
Well, in 1968,
Oh.
while flipping through a magazine in a dentist's waiting room,
Uh-huh.
Petit stumbled upon an article about the World Trade Center,
Mhm.
still under construction at the time.
Right.
As he looked at the image of those towers rising into the sky,
Yeah.
he had a vision, himself, a lone figure, walking between them. And in that moment, an obsession was born.
Talk about a life-changing dentist appointment.
Hi.
Most of us are just hoping to escape with a clean bill of dental health.
Yeah.
But for Petit,
Yeah.
it sparked a 6-year quest to make this impossible vision a reality.
Exactly. And he approached it with the same meticulousness and dedication that he brought to his craft.
Mm-hmm.
He began studying everything he could about the Twin Towers, the architectural plans, the wind patterns, the security protocols.
So he really...
It was almost like he was planning a heist.
And in a way, he was.
Mm.
I mean, this wasn't going to be a sanctioned performance.
Right.
He knew this walk would be illegal,
Absolutely.
a challenge to authority as much as a physical feat.
Precisely.
Oh.
And his preparation wasn't just theoretical. He practiced relentlessly, even having his girlfriend, Annie Alex,
Right.
tug on his practice wire in France
Oh, wow.
to simulate the wind gusts he'd face between the towers.
That level of commitment is incredible.
It
It
is.
speaks volumes about his dedication to this vision.
Yeah, it really does.
So before we get to the Twin Towers walk itself,
Okay.
there's another pivotal event we need to discuss. Petit's 1973 walk between the pylons of the Sydney Harbor Bridge.
Yeah.
Yes. I read about that.
It
Seems like that walk was a crucial stepping stone for him,
was.
both in terms of the technical challenge
Yes.
and the public attention it garnered.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was a statement, a declaration of his audacity and skill.
And it was a spectacle.
It was.
No safety net.
Right.
The interaction with the crowd below.
Yeah.
The eventual arrest.
Mhm.
It all added to the drama.
It did.
But it also proved that he could pull off something seemingly impossible.
Exactly.
What was it like?
Well, imagine. The Sydney Harbor Bridge is this massive steel structure, a symbol of Australia.
Right.
And there's Philippe Petit,
Yeah.
this tiny figure on a wire stretched between its pylons hundreds of feet above the water.
Wow.
And he's not just walking, he's performing, engaging with the crowd gathered below, pausing to lie down, You can salute them.
It must have been breathtaking to watch this blend of artistry and sheer daring.
Mm-hmm.
But I imagine it also raised concerns about public safety. Yeah. I mean, wasn't it incredibly risky, not only for Petit, but also for the people below?
It definitely was risky, and there were criticisms.
Sure.
Some argued that it was irresponsible putting lives in danger for the sake of a spectacle.
Right.
But for Petit, the risk was an inherent part of his art. He believed that by pushing boundaries, by confronting fear and danger,
Right.
he could create a more powerful and transformative experience for himself and his audience.
That's an interesting perspective.
Yeah.
It's as if he's saying that true art requires a certain level of risk, a willingness to step outside the comfort zone, to challenge not only physical limits, but also societal norms.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the Sydney Harbor Bridge Walk was a pivotal moment in his development.
Okay.
It wasn't just about the scale of the feat. It was about mastering the psychological pressure of performing illegally in front of a large and unpredictable audience with the knowledge that one wrong step could be fatal.
So after Sydney, he had tasted the thrill of performing on a grand stage, and I guess that's when the World Trade Center truly became his obsession, his ultimate artistic challenge.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating how his initial reaction to seeing those towers in person was not one of excitement, but of doubt.
Really? I would have thought he'd be even more determined seeing those massive structures rising into the sky.
Right.
What made him hesitate?
Well, imagine standing at the base of those towers, feeling their immense scale, the sheer verticality.
Okay.
It's one thing to dream it, to plan it.
Yeah.
But to actually confront the physical reality of it is another thing altogether.
Right.
And even someone with Petit's unwavering ambition and confidence could be overwhelmed by the sheer enormity of the challenge.
So what changed his mind? Did he just decide to push past the fear, or was there something more that reignited his resolve?
Well, instead of giving in to his doubts, Petit decided to go inside the towers. But he didn't just take the elevator. He walked all 110 floors to the top of the North Tower.
Wow. Talk about making a statement. That must have been an incredible experience in itself, walking up all those stairs, feeling the building grow taller with every step.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it was from that vantage point, looking across at the South Tower, seeing the cityscape spread out below, that his vision came back into focus.
Okay.
The impossible suddenly felt possible again.
That's a powerful image. A man standing atop a skyscraper, looking across at another towering structure and deciding to walk between them on a wire. It's almost like a scene from a movie.
It is cinematic, isn't it?
It is.
And like any great film, the planning and execution of this artistic heist were just as compelling as the act itself.
Right.
Petit returned to France and began assembling his team,
Yeah.
including Annie, who was instrumental in his preparation.
Yeah.
They needed fake IDs, construction worker disguises,
Wow.
a way to get a heavy steel cable across a 131-foot gap.
Yeah.
They ended up using a bow and arrow.
A bow and arrow. You're kidding. I mean, the ingenuity of it all is just remarkable. It sounds like something out of a spy thriller.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And while Petit and his team were busy with these logistical challenges,
Right.
Annie was back in that field, tugging on that practice cable, simulating those wind gusts, preparing him as best she could for the unpredictable conditions he would face. I imagine the emotional toll that must have taken on her,
Right.
knowing the risks involved.
It speaks volumes about the strength of their relationship,
Yeah.
the shared dream that bound them together. She knew she couldn't stop him, so she did everything she could to help him succeed.
Yes. And finally, the day arrived.
Okay.
August 7th, 1974.
Wow.
It was still dark early morning when Petit and his team made their move, slipping into the towers, hauling their equipment up to the roof, their hearts pounding with anticipation and a touch of fear.
It must have felt surreal, almost like stepping into a dream. But before we get to the walk itself, I'm curious to know how he managed to bypass security. I mean, the World Trade Center wasn't exactly known for its lax security measures.
That's where the meticulous planning and those fake IDs came in.
Right.
They disguised themselves as construction workers, blending in with the crews who are still working on the towers.
Okay.
And remember, this was 1974, long before the age of high-tech surveillance and airport-style security checks.
So they basically walked right in.
Yeah.
It's amazing how different the world was back then.
It really was.
Yeah.
And once they reached the roof, it was a race against time.
Oh.
They had a narrow window of opportunity before dawn broke, and their presence became more noticeable. The pressure must have been immense.
I can only imagine. Okay, so they're on the roof.
Right.
They have the cable. The wind is whipping around them. What happens next?
Yeah.
How do they get that cable across a 131-foot gap?
Oh.
I'm guessing this is where the bow and arrow comes in.
You guessed right.
Yeah.
They attached a fishing line to an arrow and shot it across to the south tower.
Wow.
Once the line was secured on the other side, they used it to pull across a heavier rope, and finally the steel cable that would serve as Petit's stage.
It's incredible how they turned this seemingly impossible feat into a series of smaller, more manageable challenges.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a key element of Petit's philosophy. He believed that any large goal, no matter how daunting, could be achieved by breaking it down into smaller, more achievable steps.
So the cable is strung, the sun is starting to rise, the city below is slowly waking up. What was going through Petit's mind at that moment as he prepared to step out onto that wire?
It must have been a mix of emotions, exhilaration, fear, a sense of purpose, and a deep connection to his art. This was the culmination of years of dreaming, planning, and practicing.
And then he takes that first step.
Yes, and the world holds its breath.
It's almost impossible to fathom the kind of focus and courage that must have taken that first step onto the wire.
Absolutely. Here he was on a thin cable, a quarter-mile above the ground, with only the wind and the distant hum of the city around him. Yet what's remarkable is that he wasn't just focused on survival. He was committed to turning this dangerous feat into a performance.
So tell me about the walk itself. What did he actually do up there?
For almost 45 minutes, Philippe Petit danced on that wire. He walked, he sat, he lay down.
Wow.
He even knelt and saluted the crowd that had gathered below.
We had a crowd. I thought this was all done in secret.
It was initially. But as the sun rose and the fog cleared, people on the ground began noticing this tiny figure moving between the towers. Word spread quickly, and soon a sizable crowd had gathered, mesmerized by this unexpected spectacle.
And how did Annie react? Seeing him up there, living out this dream they'd shared, but with such immense risk.
There are accounts of her being overwhelmed with emotion, a mix of pride, terror, and relief. She pointed him out to the crowd, urging them to look up and witness this incredible feat.
It's amazing that he was able to not only maintain his composure on the wire, but actually perform, interact with the audience, and seemingly enjoy himself.
Yeah.
It really underscores the artistry involved transforming this dangerous act into something beautiful and engaging.
Exactly. And that's what sets him apart from a typical daredevil. For Petit, it wasn't about conquering fear or proving something. It was about creating an experience, a moment of shared wonder, and even challenging the very notion of what those towers represented.
That's a great point. The World Trade Center, those symbols of corporate power and modern architecture, transformed into a stage for his art, if only for a fleeting moment. How did the authorities respond to this unsanctioned performance?
Well, eventually the police arrived, understandably concerned about this unauthorized and incredibly dangerous act. They urged him to come down, even using a helicopter, which Petit later said was more of a danger to him than the walk itself.
I can only imagine the police scrambling, trying to figure out how to handle a situation they'd never encountered before.
After about 45 minutes, realizing the authorities were closing in, Petit decided to end the performance. He climbed down onto the South Tower and was promptly arrested.
Considering the gravity of his actions trespassing reckless endangerment, I'd assume he faced some serious consequences.
Surprisingly, the charges were eventually dropped.
Really? That's unexpected. So he basically got away with it?
Not entirely. The authorities, perhaps recognizing the artistic merit of his act, opted for a rather unique punishment. He was ordered to perform a high-wire walk for children in Central Park.
That's brilliant. A fitting consequence for a performance artist, another chance to share his art, this time with a slightly less risky audience.
Indeed. And this leniency also reflects the public's reaction to Petit's walk. It wasn't just seen as reckless defiance. There was an undeniable beauty and artistry that resonated with people.
It certainly captured the imagination of the world, and of course this event propelled him into a whole new level of fame.
He became a global icon overnight, appearing on talk shows, making headlines, even writing a book about the experience. But what's remarkable is that he never let the fame overshadow his passion. He continued to perform and create walking on wires all over the world, from Niagara Falls to the Eiffel Tower.
So he stayed true to his art, even after achieving such incredible notoriety. It's a testament to his dedication and the power of following one's passion, no matter how unconventional it might be.
Exactly. And as we reflect on Philippe Petit's story, especially in light of the tragic events that later befell the World Trade Center, his walk takes on a new layer of meaning.
It's true. That image of him dancing between those towers becomes even more poignant, a reminder of a time when those buildings represented something different, a symbol of human ambition and the pursuit of the impossible.
His walk reminds us that even in a world dominated by concrete and steel, there's still room for beauty, for artistry, and for daring feats that challenge our perception of what's possible.
Well said. It seems the most important takeaway from Philippe Petit's story is that limitations often exist only in our minds. What might seem impossible can become achievable with enough vision, dedication, and a healthy dose of audacity. Thank you for taking us on this deep dive into the world of Philippe Petit.
It's been a pleasure exploring his incredible story with you.
And to our listeners, we leave you with this. What seemingly impossible dream are you holding back on? What would it take for you to step out onto that metaphorical wire and make it a reality?
Share your thoughts with us on social media. We'd love to hear what resonated with you about Philippe Petit's story.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep dreaming big.